same planet, different dimension. I found the gateway.
Hey folks, sliding into the 90s again for a follow-up to my Sliders review. Last year I did a review of the Sliders pilot episode, and that was one of my favorite shows from the 90s right up until Season 3, Exodus Part 2, where they gave Professor Maximilian Arturo, I don't consider this a spoiler, I consider this a warning. Stay away from this episode. They give Arturo one of the most pathetic on-screen deaths of any TV show or movie I've ever seen, and I kept watching the show after that, but it was just such a clear, petty shot at the actor, John Rhys-Davies, who played Sala in Indiana Jones. He'd also later go on to play Gimli in Lord of the Rings. Awesome actor, one of my favorites, and really sucked to see him go out the way he did. So I didn't revisit Sliders for a very, very long time. I didn't watch it much after that Season 3 episode. So I don't know anything about the Sci-Fi Channel move, and I never revisited it because that episode left such a bad taste in my mouth. But I've had the DVD, Season 1 and Season 2 DVD box set for ages, and checked out the pilot last year and loved it. Kept watching the show, and guess what? Season 1 and Season 2 were great. And I'm a couple episodes into Season 3, and I'm really enjoying it too. One of the best episodes of the entire show's run I just watched, called The Guardian in Season 3. So, working my way back up to Exodus. So we'll see how I feel about it after all these years. But I wanted to take some time to talk about Season 1 in depth here. A Season 1 of Sliders review. And an absolutely vital website to use if you decide to go back and rewatch some of these, or if you're completely new to Sliders. Check out earthprime.com. It is the definitive Sliders fan site. There are episode reviews, synopses, there's comics on there, exclusive media, travelogue, tons of just awesome information on Sliders, interviews with the people behind the scenes. If you feel like there's some unfinished business left with Sliders, you can get some interviews with the cast and the crew, the creator of the show, to see where things went off the rails, where it was supposed to be headed. So you definitely want to check out earthprime.com for all your Sliders information. I'm guessing there aren't going to be too many diehard Sliders fans watching this video. Most of the people will either have watched it here and there back in the day, or they've never heard of it, and maybe this will intrigue them to tracking it down, streaming somewhere online, or finding one of the old DVD sets. I don't believe it's been offered on Blu-ray. I don't think it's on high definition yet. But just a quick recap of all the episodes that are in Season 1. If you're a fan of these modern Netflix series or Amazon series, HBO series, the ones that are only about 9 or 10 episodes, then Season 1 of Sliders is right up your alley. It's not going to feel overwhelming going into like a 20 or 24 episode series. There's only 9 episodes of Season 1, so it's actually the perfect way to kind of ease into a series and see if you want to invest the time to watch all 5 of them. So I talked about the pilot episode in depth in that other review. I'll link it to the end of this review at the end. I'll also put it in the description. I won't go over that again, but I will just reiterate that the pilot episode is fantastic. It all hinged on the pilot episode for me. I was very skeptical, dusting off my DVD, which had been sitting on the shelf for years and years and years, and I had never gone through it. But it all hinged on the pilot, and it even, I'll say, it hinged on the first 10 minutes, because I was still remembering that episode, Exodus Part 2. And the magic was there. I remembered why I got drawn into the show in the first place. It was such an interesting concept, being able to not time travel, not teleport, but slide, interdimensional travel. They call it sliding, and the quirky thing is whenever they encounter other interdimensional travelers, everyone refers to it as sliding, or when they hear sliding, they go, well, yeah, what else would it be called? That's the perfect thing to call interdimensional travel. So I guess if I ever see Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Indiana Jones again, then those interdimensional beings, I'll have to go, those are sliders. They're sliding. But the pilot episode is fantastic. It's not that often that a show gets it right, gets itself right, the characters get themselves right, the actors know who they are. right off the bat. Usually when a show has a pretty good run, it takes a while for it to find its legs. TNG is a perfect example of that. A lot of people go, whew, that first season of Star Trek TNG. But they figure it out when Riker grows the beard, when the show grows the beard. Same with Deep Space Nine. I think a lot of people say the same thing about that one. A lot of shows are like that. Sliders had it perfect right from the beginning. And my biggest fault with the show is the subsequent episodes that aren't just like the pilot, that deviate from the concept of the pilot. And the thing I really loved about the pilot episode was, yeah, there's a part in the episode where things are radically changed. But my favorite part about Sliders is whenever things are slightly different. One change could lead to big changes in the alternate dimension, but it still seems like a harmless little change, and the ramifications that come as a result of that little change. I also love seeing the episodes where one of the four sliders encounters themselves, and they get to see what life would have been like if they made one different decision. How everything could have changed if they just decided, instead of making that decision, what if I made that one? And to see how the rest of the world is pretty much the same as it is, but everything in their life changed. Unfortunately, there's quite a few episodes where that isn't the premise. The premise is some big life-threatening event, and the show devolves into an action show. I think at its best, it feels like Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, where it makes you question moral dilemmas, where it makes social commentary, rather than run from the dangerous thing, get to the portal, or else we're all going to die. The first episode after the pilot episode is called Summer of Love, and some of these might be out of order on your DVD set. They were on mine, and so I went to earthprime.com to see the proper order in which you're supposed to watch them, which isn't really that big a deal. They don't feed into each other. There's really just one instance that I can think of where at the end of one episode they slide to a world where there's a big wave coming, and then the following episode in its proper order, the world is flooded and they're sliding out of this flooded world. So we don't get to see them deal with the wave, the flooding, the water world setting. And it's really not that big a deal if you watch them out of order, because that's how every episode is, whether you know the setup or not. They're in some predicament and they're trying to escape, and they get into a new world that seems safe at first, and then something goes wrong and they have to deal with that. So the episode Summer of Love deals with the idea of, what if the Summer of Love had never ended? What if Woodstock had never ended and everyone just stayed hippies and we're all about peace and love? And we get to see that, sometimes these ideas that we have, wouldn't it have been ideal if this happened or that happened? Summer of Love is one of those episodes where, careful what you wish for, you just might get it, and you get to see the consequences of having something that you think would be so perfect and ideal. The Prince of Wales is a really interesting concept. What if England had won the Revolutionary War? So instead of being the United States of America, they're ruled by England, and this episode suffers from what I call the crowded world syndrome. It sometimes happens in Star Wars, where a character who's on the other side of the galaxy runs into a familiar character. Or it happens also in Star Trek, where it just makes it feel like a really small universe or a small galaxy. When the sliders are running into each other, that's fine if we're dealing with what if I had made one different decision. But what starts to become a little tedious is exactly what happens in The Prince of Wales. Arturo, the professor, is a prominent leader. He's a prominent figure in this episode. So we see that a lot in Sliders, actually, where one of the four core sliders, or maybe even more than one of them, become a very prominent person, either a celebrity or infamous, some sort of figurehead. So that's Maximilian Arturo in this episode. And it just feels like, in the regular world, he's a professor, which means he's pretty smart, but how can these guys so often in so few episodes become such prominent figures? Especially like Wade Wells was just an average girl on her regular world. Quinn Mallory is brilliant. He's a kid genius, but he's kind of this quiet, shy, introverted genius, and you don't really expect him to rise to prominence either. And then you got Remy the Crying Man Brown, a singer who always dreamed of being like Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. And he was just kind of working bars and stuff, and to see him become some huge thing, especially if it's not even in the realm of music, if he becomes like a big federal agent or something, that just makes you go, all right, that's a real stretch, and that's deviating from the concept of what if I made one little different decision. But that was an interesting episode, albeit one of those episodes where their lives are at stake and there's a lot of action and a lot of drama, rather than delving into how would things have changed if this one world event had gone differently. The episode Fever asks the question, how would the world be different if penicillin had never been invented? It's something that we all take for granted, but the world would be a very different place without that very simple medicine. And they show us a world that isn't actually very much different from the world we live in right now, with things that are going on right now in the world. So that's a little eerie, and it also suffers again from that crowded world syndrome, crowded interdimensional world syndrome, because Quinn Mallory is a very, very prominent, his alternate self is a very prominent character in this story. He's not just involved in one of the major forces, he's the head of it. He's the poster boy that everyone's running after, and he rocks the most glorious interdimensional mullet you have ever seen in this episode. So whenever they run into their alternate selves, usually they tweak the look a little bit of a different hairstyle or different facial hair or something, clothing style. But Quinn Mallory he's rocking an ultimate mullet that would make Jack Burton proud. Last Days is another episode that deals with the fate of the world. Literally, there's an asteroid that's on a collision course towards Earth, and it's going to destroy the planet. So that presents a problem to the Sliders, because their tool that they use to slide between dimensions, it has a counter on it, and they never know what the counter is going to say. They never know how much time they have on each planet. Sometimes they have a few minutes, maybe a few hours, a few days, maybe a month. And on this planet, the timer says they won't be able to slide until after the world is supposed to be destroyed. So they don't have any choice but to save the world. And that's another one of those episodes that really strays from that pilot episode idea. And now we've got Arturo working on something that will help destroy this asteroid, save the entire planet, so that the four of them can keep traveling between dimensions. Next is the episode titled The Weaker Sex, and it's one of the best episodes of the season. It's also one of the best episodes of the whole show's run, a lot of Sliders fans say. And this episode is going back to the pilot episode concept of what if things were just a little tweaked. The gender inequality in this episode is flipped so that it's men who are discriminated against. It's a woman's world. And there's a lot of comedy in this episode. Scenes where Quinn and the Crying Man and the professor are being ogled at and just looked at like pieces of meat. It is quite funny. It is also a very powerful social commentary, because after being funny for a bit, it starts to get really disappointing, really disgusting. And hopefully it lets people who never think about it the other way, people who look down on women in the workplace and think, well, you know, it's your duty to get coffee for the meeting and stuff. Hopefully this is an episode that will make them think about equality and how inappropriate some of the treatment of women has been throughout the years. This one really reminded me of Star Trek, the original series. It felt like something that Gene Roddenberry would have written, or some Orville episodes. It's fun, but then there's something uneasy about it. You know that there's something wrong going on here, despite the kind of quirkiness and the zaniness going on. It's not a stretch to imagine that women would find Jerry O'Connell attractive, maybe ogle at him, look at him like a piece of meat. The fun of the episode comes where Arturo has to go through this, because he's not a character you would imagine any woman hitting on or trying to take advantage of. And seeing the Crying Man taken advantage of by an executive, they've basically taken that age-old story of the executive who uses a woman, either a singer or an actress, anything in the entertainment business, makes false promises, uses them physically to have their way with them, and then just discards them. Remy goes through that, and while it's kind of funny and fun at first, it sucks by the end of it, and I think that's what makes a really effective social commentary. That's how Gene Roddenberry used to do it. He'd draw you in with the fun and the entertainment, but then he'd leave you thinking instead of leave you laughing. And this episode shows you that the four sliders have absolutely no concern whatsoever for what they called in Star Trek the Prime Directive. They are usually not worried about changing the course of events on any planet they go to. They left penicillin on one world that didn't have any. In this world, before they slide, Arturo feels compelled to try to create something that will get the ball rolling on equality between men and women on that planet. Eggheads is another episode that raises a very interesting what-if question. What if instead of worshiping athletes, we worshipped our most intellectual individuals? And so on this planet, brilliant people, scientists, scholars, inventors, are looked at as celebrities. So obviously Quinn Mallory, the genius, he's a genius on this world that they slide to in Eggheads as well, are revered, they're exalted, and it's really interesting to just see the exact same type of adulation, but for a totally different type of person. And it's not all just quirky fun in this one. There's also a really cool what if, like a heavy what if. We learn that Arturo's wife passed away on his planet, on Earth Prime, and so he's reunited with her on this planet. She hasn't passed away on this planet. And instead of having a really deep emotional reunion, at least from Arturo's point of view, he finds out that his wife is suing him for divorce. Next episode is one of my favorites of season 1. It's called The King is Back. The sliders slide onto a world that is very similar to their original world. That's my favorite concept, when not too much is different. Except one thing was completely different for one of the sliders. On Earth Prime, Remy Brown never had much of a career as a singer. On this planet, he is the king of rock and roll. Instead of Elvis Presley, it was Rembrandt, the Crying Man Brown. And he disappeared on this planet. He was thought to be dead. And so when this Crying Man, the Earth Prime's Crying Man, our Remy Brown, shows up on the streets and everyone starts recognizing him, some people think he's dressed up as the king, as the Crying Man. And then they find out he's actually the Crying Man. He can sing the same songs as the Crying Man. They wrote a lot of the same songs. And he finds out that the reason his career took off to not just superstardom, but went through the stratosphere, he became as big as Elvis, is because he made a different choice in managers. So that's all it took. He remembered this guy from his own world and he decided not to go with him. But on this planet, the other alternate Remy Brown did go with this manager, which made all the difference. And the episode gets even more interesting when the actual real Rembrandt Brown from that planet shows up again. You find out that he faked his death, just like a lot of people suspected that Elvis Presley faked his own death. And he wants to pass his stardom, his fame, onto this double. And then there's a very interesting twist that I won't spoil, but I will say that the scenes between the two Rembrandt Browns are especially cool, because instead of doing blue screen work or green screen work where they just have the actor who plays the Crying Man talking to himself, they brought in his twin brother. He has a twin brother in real life. So you get to see them interact with each other. I think the Crying Man actor does ADR. He dubs the lines for his twin brother so that they sound exactly the same, but they look almost identical. Even though they're identical brothers, they're not perfectly identical. I knew there was something off about it, so I Googled it and found out he had a twin. The twin in this episode is just a little thinner than our Earth Prime's Rembrandt Brown, which I thought added to the story, the concept, because why wouldn't he be a little bit different in shape, in build, because he's had a different life? Maybe because he's had such a high degree of success, he's taking care of himself a little bit more, physically speaking. So I thought that was just an added bonus, having a double that was an actual in the flesh double that the actors got to play off of each other. And the final episode is called Luck of the Draw, and that is one where if you win the lottery, you die. First you get pampered with all sorts of wonderful things. If you're a visitor to this planet, you would think winning the lottery is a fantastic thing. But soon you find out that it's actually a form of population control. People who win the lottery are actually willingly sacrificing themselves to keep the population under control, and they're getting to be pampered before they check out. So that was another really kind of out there concept, but that's how this season ends. So if you're a fan of classic sci-fi shows like The Outer Limits, or The Twilight Zone, or Star Trek, or even X-Files, this show feels a lot like X-Files. I think it was filmed in a lot of the same places. There's always an overcast. Sometimes it's raining. Sometimes it's snowing. You can see the cold breath. It's got a definite X-Files vibe to it. Check out Sliders. I understand that a lot of people don't have the time to just sit through and watch an entire season, but I would highly recommend 3 episodes. So don't worry about tracking the whole thing down, watching the whole thing. Check out the pilot episode. Check out The King is Back. Check out The Weaker Sex. And I think you'll know everything you need to know about the show after watching that trilogy of episodes. If you thought it was okay, but not okay enough to keep watching, that's fine, move on. But you might fall in love with the characters and the concept after those 3 episodes. So after watching those 3, if you do completely fall in love with the concept and the idea and the performances, you can watch the rest of the first season. The rest of the episodes aren't as good as those 3, but they're not terrible. A lot of season 2 is good. There might be 1 or 2 great episodes in season 2. And you can rest assured that when you get to season 3, there's going to be a couple of good episodes in that one as well. A great one. Maybe it's not like Sequest or a lot of other shows that after the first season it was like, oh, they should have stopped after the first season. So that's my Sliders thoughts. If you'd like to share your own, scroll down and go to town and to join the tribe. Whoa! Why isn't anything blue here? Weird! Hit subscribe.